I'm Nathan Fullerton. I recently had an opportunity to borrow a few higher-end cameras than I'm used to, so I decided to put them to the test. In particular, the impossible test. What do I mean by that? I mean this. Your standard living room scene with a huge picture window and a brightly lit outside, and inside only illuminated by a single 100-watt bulb in the ceiling. So normally we have to choose. Do we blow out the windows and get the talent inside? Or do we expose for the outside and leave the talent completely in the dark? Well, I want a camera that can do both. And hey, technology's getting better, so I thought I'd put these guys to the test. We don't always have control over our environment, so I thought this was a very real-world test. I wanted to see which camera could produce usable footage in such a scenario. I figured this would be a really good test of real-world dynamic range. Any camera can look good if you carefully set up the lights, if you control your environment completely. But when you can't control that environment, that's where the weak truly stumble. And that's what I wanted to see, is which camera stumbled. We put all the cameras next to each other. It was about 5 feet from one end to the other. We didn't want to build any complicated rig to get them closer. We just wanted to do a quick test. All the cameras ran simultaneously, so it's exactly the same footage. All the cameras were set to 3200 ISO. Why did I do that? I wanted to see the noise. I figured when I'm shooting inside in a dark residential place, I might actually have it cranked up that high just to get the interiors. So I wanted to see what it was going to look like when that kind of noise was entered in. Like I said, this is a worst case scenario test. It's the impossible shot, so I wanted to make the cameras work as hard as I possibly could. All the cameras' apertures were set so that the exterior didn't clip. I did this using the internal histograms of each camera. I did try to control the shutter speed, but I know that I forgot on a couple cameras. I think they're all close to 60. So a pretty real-world test. That's how we're going to do it in the field, so that's how I did it. You look at the histogram, see where it clips, and I just made it so that none of them clip. The white balance was set to the sunlight preset on all the cameras, and on all the cameras except the GH4, we recorded at 1080p 24. We tried to set every camera to its flattest profile, which means in the cameras that do log, we set it to log. In the GH2 and the em5, we used what we usually use when we're shooting, which are some fairly flat profiles that attempt to eke out the most dynamic range from those cameras that don't support log. As for bit rates, the GH2 was hacked to 50 megabits, the em5 was set to 50 megabits, the FS-5 was set to 70 megabits because the camera detected the speed of the card and wouldn't let me record at the 140 megabit setting. The JVC LS-300 was set to 50 megabits per second, which was not its best mode. Whoopsie. I had never used the camera before, and I didn't know the XHQ versus the 422 setting. Should have figured that one out, but I recorded in the XHQ mode, which has a little bit less color depth and a little bit more noise. So the JVC, the results that you're going to see are a little bit less than its best. And as you'll see, that's wow. The GH4 was set to 100 megabits 4K. That's how we use the camera, and honestly, I forgot to switch it back. So the GH4 used 4K, it doesn't really make any difference. We downscaled it. Might give it a slight edge in noise, but not really. As for color grading, I graded it with Final Cut Pro 10's color corrector. I know, hold on. I tried to use Color Finale. The results weren't noticeably better, and Color Finale had some kind of masking bug that made it so I couldn't apply multiple grades to the same piece of footage stacked on top of each other. It was bizarre, it was horrible, it was very buggy, and it crashed a lot. So frankly, I wanted to really like that software because I love the color wheels, but it failed me. So there you go. What I did was use a color mask to select the highlights of the image, and then I graded the inside and I graded the outside. So it's the same key for both. The key is a little crusty. Hey, it's just a test. As for the technicals, I set the blacks to black in the scopes, and the midtones and highlights I just adjusted to make the image as aesthetically pleasing as possible. I was just trying to have every camera put their best foot forward. And with that, the moment you've been waiting for, the test footage. Here's the GH2. As you might expect from such an old camera, the quality isn't that great. Lots of noise, a little bit of color shifting, but you know, it actually didn't do as bad as I expected. Did a lot better than I expected. And here's the GH4. This is using its Vlog setting. It is already, you can see, noticeably better than the GH2, but still, you know, not fantastic. But considering it's basically a $1,200 camera these days, the results are pretty impressive. And here's my poor little em5 Mark II. The em5 clearly has the least dynamic range of all these cameras. It still did a nice job exposing for the outside, but as you can see, the interior is completely unusable. And here's the surprise of the bunch, the LS-300. As you look at that, this footage is almost usable, and this was a very bad case scenario. And finally, here's the FS-5. We expected the FS-5 to kick butt over all the other cameras, and it certainly beat the GH4, but it did not beat the JVC LS-300, which was a real surprise. I did find the noise in the FS-5 more cinematic, so it might be more acceptable, but the JVC didn't have nearly as much noise. So all in all, I think the JVC is the winner. So there you have it, quite the surprise. I felt that the LS-300 had the most dynamic range and actually produced a usable image in this horrible circumstance. Now granted, it wasn't, you know, a fantastic image, but if we really wanted to see the outside and the inside, you could actually probably use that image. I was deeply impressed. I didn't think any of them would do very well at this, but the JVC actually really blew me away. And it's a surprise because all the reviews I've read of it said that it does not have good dynamic range. I can't imagine what they were thinking, but maybe the log software that recently came out for that camera made all the difference.